Horrorphiles, you're listening to Dissecting Horror, examining the anatomy of fear in film, television, and literature. I'm writer and performer Kelsey Zukowski.
I'm filmmaker Stephen Aguilera. On this, our first episode, Kelsey and I will be setting the tone by dissecting each other. That's right, exposing the blood and guts of our innermost thoughts and feelings on the subject of horror, while shoehorning in as many other cheesy horror puns wherever we can fit them.
We are the Horror Whisperers, your champions of horror and keepers of the fearscape, on this podcast of frightsome delights, if you will.
I will. And we hope you will join us too, won't you?
So, Stephen, what was your first cinematic or literary fright that sticks out in your mind? Your first notable experience with the genre, whether it left you in fascination or churning away in terror?
Early on, I used to watch creature features with Bob Wilkins and later John Stanley up in the Bay Area. And this was with my dad every Friday night. We used to watch a lot of old Hammer horror films, that sort of thing. And I think it was The Legend of Hell House with Roddy McDowall, which really gave me the creeps more than any other. And there was a lot of, it's a haunted house film, but they didn't really show a whole lot. There isn't really much in the way of special effects or jump scares, that sort of thing. But it was creepy because it felt, it was British, and somehow the British are creepier than Americans in my mind. But the darkness of that haunted house made me feel it lit my imagination on fire. I didn't know what was in the dark, and it made me feel, I don't know if I would really be frightened of it now. I watch it every Halloween, but it's part of my kid thinking back then, and my imagination before life has crushed my soul. But I would say The Legend of Hell House was probably my first memory. And to this day, making a haunted house film is something that I would love to do. That's my favorite subgenre of horror, resultingly.
Nice. So sort of the fear of the unknown and the mystery.
Yes. Nice. And that's one thing about that film. It had a great deal of mystery. It wasn't just a supernatural occurrence with a haunted entity, but there was a mystery about the house itself in terms of what was the reason for it being haunted. And they were all there to establish that as somewhat paranormal investigators. I don't know if they called it that back then, but I like this idea of people who, in this case, don't exist anymore. They've been dead for a very, very long time, but there are echoes of their lives still present in that environment. And you're trying to think, what was making this person tick? Why did they do the things that they did? Why did they die? And that's, if anything, the only thing interesting about ghost stories for me is like, how did this person die? Or what was their story? Why are you still around? That sort of thing. Mystery in itself is something that I think somehow ties in very closely with horror. And I like a combination. It's an extra layer of something interesting happening.
Right.
Oh, it's my turn, isn't
it?
This is a question I've wrestled with here and there. It doesn't keep me awake at night, but I'm curious as to what your take would be on it. Have you ever wrestled with the question, does being such a fan of horror perhaps reflect something negative in one's own personality? I mean, horror does, after all, literally focus on such joyless subject matter as fear, suffering, pain, death, and destruction. Does that say something about us?
You certainly could view it like, why do you have this focus on, things that include torture, death, suffering? But I think there's a lot of interesting exploration that you can find through that. One quote that always comes to mind from one of my favorite filmmakers, Wes Craven, horror films don't create fear, they release it. Which I always really loved. And that's kind of how I view the genre in a lot of ways, that it's almost like a healthy exploration, even in understanding a lot of things about the human struggle. Like, I view a lot of things in horror films almost as metaphorical. Like, this is putting maybe daily struggles you do have in life to an extreme in this other lens. And yeah, things like that struggle and fight for survival and finding a way to fight against impossible odds, and even just looking at the truth that there are some very dark, twisted, immoral people out there. And I think in a way, a little bit being aware of that, but also viewing it and finding strength in fighting through those things, I think is what I view it as, more than just the world is a miserable place. Like, that's not really how I view horror. I view, the positive aspects and what it chooses to explore and to understand, even dark, uncomfortable things that a lot of times people, don't want to focus on or go into. But I think horror is a great tool and avenue to have those kind of difficult conversations and address those dark things, but also find sort of a silver lining and hope among them.
To that point, I was thinking the other day about some of these serial killer docuseries and biopics, and how it could be looked at as exploitation of the victims and even their loved ones, or even the loved ones of the serial killers themselves. And that's probably true, actually. I don't know. There's got to be some negative repercussions on them to see this stuff glorified.
Absolutely.
I don't think it's the type of content that would encourage people to be serial killers. That's not the cause of
like, oh, wow, that's a great idea. Worked out great for this guy.
But I was thinking something similar to what you just said, in that it is somewhat helpful, or I don't know if healthy is the word, just to see what the true depths of depravity that exist, so you can be wary of that and see the dark side of humanity and act accordingly. Well, I would say just watching CNN is probably more harmful to making you feel paranoid about living, or any kind of news, in terms of how bad the world is, and newspapers and things like that.
Right.
And so this, if anything, I think watching a biopic about Jeffrey Dahmer seems more detached and a special circumstance. But at the same time, there is some educational knowledge, and maybe it's even, this is a stretch, I'm sure, it saved some lives by having people realize, oh, I shouldn't get into vans with you.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm sure there are disturbed people who find horror appealing because it does appeal to them in terms of perhaps them putting themselves in the killer's position, and it's like a fantasy thing. We can't assign blame to things like video games necessarily, or horror films, or Tarantino films, or anything else.
Right.
It is what it is.
I agree. All right. So how about your gateway drug to being a horrophile? What film, book, or show was it that turned the tables from fear to fascination? The horror fiction that got you to look deeper into the genre and truly catch the horror bug?
Interesting. I think it may have been in the 4th grade. We had a Halloween story writing contest. And I might even say earlier than that, just the fact of Halloween itself has always been a fun, exciting, by far the best holiday. When I was writing this story, which somehow folded in Darth Vader, because he's always something of a horror character for me anyway, in this haunted house, and I had to read it in front of the class. Everybody had to read. It was a very weird experience, actually, but everybody loved it. They ate it up. And that response, I think, ignited in me an interest in what writing horror can do. And I felt more immersed in the genre than ever before, despite having watched lots of creature features with my dad. But I think that really excited me the most. And I won first place, by the way.
Oh, nice.
It was my only award for the next, I don't know how many decades, until like this year. So, yeah, it's...
It was a path you were meant to take.
Yeah, and it worked out. So I think if you know your calling, most people figure that out pretty early in life. And I know I did.
Awesome.
Okay, so this one's deep.
Okay.
There are certain genres that appeal mostly to male or female audiences. Action films, for example, tend to be leaned into more by males, while romance draws a greater female crowd. Growing up, horror had always seemed like more of a guy thing to me.
Mhm.
But as I consider all the horror fans I know now, it seems more equal, or if anything, majority women. What has been your experience?
I really got into horror. I would say I was around 13. Yeah, I would say overall, for especially when I was younger, I was more I guess in the rarity of women who were into horror. But yeah, I think maybe it's even with more stronger roles for women in the genre, more independent, maybe even with more television, horror TV kind of taking off. Maybe it's getting more into the mainstream, or I don't know. I think in a lot of ways, horror can also represent, I don't know, the outcast and misunderstood. And, so part of that always related to me. And I think there's some great things that can be done with horror with the scope, for women and their experience, and emerging that through horror. But it's not always about gender, Sometimes it's just this film resonates with me, or the themes and power. So it's always been something I've identified a lot with, and it's cool to see more of a community and maybe it resonating with more women overall.
I would ask as a follow up, what do you think the appeal is, generally speaking, to women? Is there anything more beyond what you just said?
Yeah, and I think part of it is that women have always had a big role in horror, and maybe because it's a reflection, I think of what maybe a lot of women do go through in real life, that we see that emanated on the screen, whether it be fear of someone stalking, or maybe walking home alone at night and not feeling fully safe. And I think horror films can kind of show that vulnerability and that fear and certain realities of maybe not always feeling safe in the world. And I mean, granted, men can be attacked too and everything, but it can also show that, final girl strength of, being smart and capable and fighting against all odds. And it actually kind of reminds me of one quote from Mallory O'Mara, who wrote a book called The Lady from the Black Lagoon, which is her pretty much trying to hunt down and bring out a story of Millicent Patrick, who was the only woman who created the creature design for any Universal monster movie. And the quote is, "Women are the most important part of horror because by and large, women are the ones that horror happens to. Women have to endure it, fight it, survive it, in the movies and in real life. Women need to see themselves fighting monsters. That's part of how we figure out our stories." So I think, yeah, that kind of sums up in a lot of ways why, yeah, I think action or gore seems can be more associated with men. But I think as there have been more horror films or fiction all around across the board that maybe show women's stories more and are more about their strength and fighting. I really like the horror that's like sort of not necessarily like someone who's super well equipped with this like, tactical like background. But it's kind of nice just to see like the normal woman, but who can be smart and strong and fight back in what is usually like as a scenario that you could say like, oh, I would do this or that in that situation, but until you're in that situation, it's hard to say, and but the people who can kind of hold their own and fight back and have that strength, the final girl essentially, I think you take that away, and I think anyone can. I think men can take that away too, to be watching a film and see someone just go through impossible odds and keep on fighting for that thirst for life and take a little bit of that strength with them when they finish that film.
I think it's angling itself, horror in general, in that direction more as time goes on. I was watching a clip from the version, is it The House on Haunted Hill with Vincent Price from the
Mm-hmm.
1950s or so?
Yeah, sounds right.
There's a specific clip of a woman who just stands there and screams her head off hysterically as this skeleton sort of rolls by wires in her general direction, and she helplessly continues to scream. It's like straight out of Austin Powers or
Yeah.
something. And then she eventually falls into a vat of acid or something.
Right.
And the extent to which she screams hysterically while taking no action beyond that whatsoever is so irritating. Oh my God, will somebody kill this woman as quickly as possible. You can't
Right.
root for somebody like that. So I can definitely appreciate what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the way to go. And I think society eventually is caught up with that point of view.
Yeah, and you're right. That used to be more the norm. It was the damsel in distress horror, and it is even it's been refreshing to see earlier on the stronger, at least smart, capable. They're at least aware of their surroundings. They're trying their best to get out of this horrible situation, regardless of what happens. So some of those, it's been great to see. One reason I love Nancy from Nightmare on Elm Street. She was a pretty normal, girl, but she's like, okay, I'm going to be smart about this. I'm into survival, and I'm going to do everything I can to beat this, supernatural dream god at his own game, and actually got in there. So it's like it's refreshing, even earlier on, to see some of the roles like that. And it is nice that now, as more time has gone on, it's less of the if you see a screaming damsel in distress literally doing nothing to like even try to get away, it's usually the trope and making fun of that stereotype more than what you would normally see. So I guess that says something that we've come a little ways, at least.
Yeah, it's also lazy writing, and I think people come to expect more over time.
Currently, your favorite horror film, book, and show, those that you regard in the highest esteem or felt the deepest connection to in their vision and execution of horror.
Film, I would say, I should know this. This ties in with an earlier question of yours. I would say the earliest experiences involve those formative tastes. Alien was very disturbing to me as a kid. And even after all these years, I rewatch it and it still holds up. There's a few technological points, perhaps when they're typing away at the keyboard in the computer room where you see blinking lights. Okay, computers have evolved since then, but everything else, especially horror-related, environment-related, is just spot on. I wish they'd make more horror films today that had that kind of imagination that based on Giger's artwork and so forth. So that was the one that set apart for me a standard by which horror from then on had to live up to.
Right.
Now, as far as TV series, one of the few and perhaps only things that actually freaks me out are zombies. As overdone as zombies have become in the past 10, 15 years, The Walking Dead, that really, the test for me if a film was effective, scary-wise, is when I go outside, especially at night, to walk the dog or check the mail or something, if I'm looking around my environment with a heightened sense of nervousness, then I'm freaked out. It's the most precise translation of horror in my mind, in that it's literally death, but it's still alive and it's still a threat to you, as opposed to maybe a ghost, which is just spooky, but what the fuck's a ghost gonna do to me? But a zombie, it's actually dead, but it could make you like one of them. And that in itself is terrifying, the contagion of it and so forth. So I would say The Walking Dead, but I never watched the last few seasons. There was one, was it Keegan?
Yeah.
Tegan.
Negan. I stopped watching. I haven't watched it all the way through either, but I'm familiar with the character.
There's that one episode, no spoilers, but he just goes to town I think it's his actual introduction, and I wasn't able to watch it. It was too disturbing,
Okay.
that moment. I thought, I don't that crossed the line for me, and so I never watched it
Okay.
since, but I've been meaning to, but, it takes a little bit of, buildup of courage for me to do that, which is weird for me to say because these things don't usually have any effect on
Yeah.
me, but this is more character-based in its, disturbing aspect. Literature, I don't think I've read a book in my life that was fiction.
Okay, we'll work on that.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. In fact, my next question will have something to do with that. But I've read short stories and I've listened to lots of creepypastas,
Yeah.
and that's the closest I
I
can
think that
get
counts.
to.
That's still written word horror, you know.
Those that are played out by actors as like a stage play kind of a thing
Yeah.
are most well received by me. But I don't know if I have a specific one that really affect. There are, but I couldn't tell you what they were called or who wrote them.
Right. So, yeah, interesting. You said you have this line of this is too disturbing. Now, was that just because you cared about the characters, or was it something they did? And do you have any other lines in horror where you're like, okay, I can take a lot, but this is where I draw that line?
It was definitely a character-based thing where you have a person that you followed for years and you've invested so much, and then
Mm,
they get clobbered one way or another. You feel almost betrayed by the writers
yeah.
because, wow, I really like that guy or that gal, and
Hmm.
you fucking killed him. And there's a
Right.
there's a sense of anybody could go. And if they're going to do that, it raises the stakes.
Hmm.
And that could be a good thing, but it also makes you feel like there's an extra tension that perhaps is unwanted. But fuck was his name? Flint, I think was his name in Jaws.
Hmm.
The guy, spoiler alert, obviously Flint dies, if you didn't figure that out already, by the shark.
Hmm.
And that was a very traumatic thing to watch as a kid.
Yeah.
He was such a manly man throughout the whole thing, and then to watch him getting bit in half, literally screaming like a baby,
Hmm.
just it was really cringy. Of course, I was a little kid when I watched
Right.
it, so
Right.
that is a holdover. I think I can re-experience that emotion. It triggers that again.
Hmm.
Alien chest burster scene, that
Yeah.
was another one along the same age and level of intensity and realism. Wow. I can't think of anything else. But I will say, to your point, that it's primarily the characters that we've invested in. And that's so important. If you're just killing
Hmm.
off a bunch of random campers,
Right.
it doesn't really mean anything.
Hmm.
But if you care about them, that time spent fleshing out their characters is so important. I usually find most characters in horror films annoying, and I
Yeah.
want them to die
Ah, there
because
you
they're just so
go.
fucking stupid. The stupid decisions that people make
Right.
are abound in this genre. So when one, like, if Simon Pegg were to have died,
Yeah.
I think Shaun of the Dead is so underrated in terms of the performances, especially by Simon Pegg.
Hmm.
His acting in that is Oscar worthy, and I'm not kidding. Even
Yeah.
though it's a horror comedy, the range of emotions that he displays, intense grief and fear, while being funny at the same time,
Right. It's not easy.
it's hard to do that shit.
Yeah.
And he does it so naturally, and the timing, that's just genius, and it should be recognized more in the awards arenas. All right, this is the laziest question I could have come up with, but
Give it to me.
what subgenre of horror frightens you the most?
See, frightens is kind of difficult for me because I'm to the point where I don't, for the most part, I don't really get scared by horror films. But for me, there are ones that disturb me. So the subgenre I like most is probably combination of like psychological body horror. I really, I think there's so much interesting stuff and powerful that can be done with that and still grotesque and it's very much metaphorical. Like, if I think of the horror film that disturbed me and sat with me most, it would be Jack Ketchum's The Girl Next Door, which is based on true crime, which is a girl being kidnapped and tortured by her caretaker and neighborhood kids, which is based on a true story.
I thought you were going to
Um,
say a different movie which had that exact effect on me,
okay.
and that was Seven.
Oh, I love Seven.
That took me, I think, 3
That's one of my
days.
favorite films
Me
ever.
too. That really rattled me for like 3 days.
Yeah. Yeah, that one definitely got me and stuck with me, but it wasn't. So after I watched Girl Next Door, it was that, like, I don't know, just feeling of being like gross and invaded. Like,
I've
I
never heard of
really,
that movie
oh my
before.
God, yeah, it's incredible. Well, Jack Ketchum is a really great horror writer, or I should say was, he's passed. And he tends to take a lot of very gritty, either true crime or just like very intensely barbaric, human versus monster sort of material. Like The Woman was also based on one of his stories. Lucky McKee, the director, tends to work with him a lot and adapt a lot of his stories into films. And yeah, he just has this very brutal, but like, I don't know, gritty and honest. And I think there's a lot of, especially in Girl Next Door, I think you just feel so much for this girl who is like, there's really no reason why this is being done to her. But yeah, her caretaker just decides to view her as this villain. And I think it's a lot of it's also the acting and just both characters and how they're both just very, very interesting. But yeah, just this cruel brutality. And I think it's, the type of things that happen behind closed doors. And I guess if I had to say like what kind of gets under my skin most, I guess probably stuff like that, like just brutal, sort of true crime-esque, or just kind of the horrible things humans can do to other humans. And I think especially in like the home, like if it's like your own family, there was another really powerful, emotional, small indie film that hardly anyone I ever talked to has ever heard of. It's called Baby Blues. I believe it was 2008. It's about a mother who's suffering from postpartum depression, and one day she just snaps and kills her kids one after the other. So then it becomes a big battle of this young boy trying to protect his siblings against their mother, who they still love but has lost it. And so it's just very heartbreaking and powerful. But stuff like that happens. So I think if I had to say probably what would scare me or get under my skin most, something like that, where someone is just really being attacked and brutalized. And I think that whole like demeaning, like you deserve this, you brought this on, when they've done nothing wrong, is kind of part of it too.
Yeah, I agree. There's something chilling about even having a child. You don't know if that child's going to be born crazy. I heard
Hmm.
a very graphic story, true story of a couple who had a baby that would just cry for like a year and a half nonstop.
Oh wow.
And as it grew up, it was more and more disturbing of a child and its behavior.
Hmm.
And they had another kid, and that kid was under threat by this other kid with a knife, and it
Oh
got
wow.
really intense. It was like one of those subreddit stories that I
Hmm.
suppose somebody could have written, but the
Yeah.
possibility exists of these real life scenarios. And especially chilling is when a parent whose primal role is to be the caregiver, and they're the ones out to get you. There's
Yeah.
something so like, where's your recourse? Because they're your recourse
Right.
in danger. If we can base our horrors on something plausible, there was a video that somebody captured in London, I think, of a woman just jogging next to a street. And there's another guy jogging the other way, and just random people. And he just shoves her in front of a bus that's coming her way. Just saw the woman, just shoved her really hard into the street, and the bus stopped in time. But it's like, why did he do that? There was no reason. She
Right.
didn't recognize him from anything. It was just that kind of horror that exists in and amongst us in society
Right.
every day. Like when you were coming over here in the traffic, There was probably one or two psychopaths somewhere that live as normal functioning humans that
Right.
nobody would consider crazy people because they're able to function as normals. But it's that hidden psychosis that actually exists around us. It doesn't have to be anything alien or ghosts or
Right.
whatnot. So
Yeah. Who in the wide world of horror, from screen to the page, inspired you most as an artist?
this might be an unpopular opinion. M. Night Shyamalan.
All right.
I watched The Sixth Sense with a friend, and we both very much enjoyed it. He wasn't even a horror fan, but I walked away from that thinking the feelings I had for the characters and the cleverness of it all, the twist I never saw coming,
hmm
it just landed everything. The music was just so beautiful. It was a beautiful movie,
Right.
and it had scares in it, and it was genius. It was just put together so perfectly, every detail. And you watch it again, you go, oh, fuck, yeah, that was totally
Yeah.
everything. Just nailed it. I'm actually a big fan of him in that era. There was a decade there where he did a few that, like
hmm
the Village, I even like. I think most
Yeah, I
people
like
I
that
talk
too.
about. It's amazing how your audience can turn on you. I've learned a lot from his career,
hmm
and I think there are certain traps you can fall into and certain expectations you feel like you have to meet. You have to stay level-headed about what you should do that still fits in the mainstream mold of what other people can expect. I tend to, when I work on films, it's more, I want to do something fresh and new and take it in a new direction, but that's so risky. And I really can't understand why Hollywood feels safer going with something tried and true. But I really do wish there was more stuff that was out there that I'd rather be the guy that other people try to make movies like
hmm
than be the guy that makes movies like Ridley Scott did or somebody
Yeah.
that.
So your own style and take.
But it's definitely much more challenging, and you're laying yourself open to a lot more attack and just disappointment or whatever. But I would say M. Night Shyamalan, but he came later in my life.
hmm
I don't know if I can think of anyone specific. I never really had role models. I never looked at like, oh, I want to be just like Steven Spielberg. I've admired his work. The certain influences, John Williams as a composer,
Right.
I tend to want to write music that sounds like more of a Jerry Goldsmith or James Horner or some of your classical composers. But I never really, especially with horror, found someone specific that I would want to follow in the footsteps of.
hmm Now, I have to ask, have you watched Servant on Apple Plus, which is Shyamalan's newest series? I think it's one of the best things he's done, at least it's Sixth Sense. It's incredible.
I have not. I don't have Apple Plus.
Okay, it's a very, very good show. Yeah, I really.
I never heard of it until you just said it just
Oh
now.
no, it's incredible. Yeah. Yeah, it's just like this fucked up little family and characters, but they become endearing, and it's very weird, but like wonderfully weird. But yeah, I love it. I think it's definitely the best he's been in a while. So if you're a fan.
Are there any subgenres of horror that definitely turn you off, repelling you in a bad way, or if anything, appeal to you the least?
I don't really like I asked you, I don't really have any lines of like I know some people are like, oh, if kids are hurt, I won't watch it or, anything like that. And I don't really have much lines. I think for me, it's just if you're going to be I don't know, shocking or disturbing or go there, just have a reason.
Yeah, it has
Like
to be
have
earned.
something, like a purpose that a story you're trying to tell or themes you're trying to get across. At first, when I first watched Human Centipede, it took me a minute. I'm like, do I like this movie or do I hate it? I decided I hated it because it felt like there was no point. It felt like shock and gross out for the
Gratuitous.
sake of it. Whereas there was some interesting potential, like even with the doctor, why is he doing this? And the things that I just felt they didn't really care about. But if they would have put a little bit more focus on some of that and I could have viewed it as art that was super disturbing and fucked up, I would have been all about it. So I don't think there's really any lines. Yeah, I don't really think so as long as there's a point and it's still about the story. What is the thing you have created you are most proud of and feel is most true to your brand of horror?
I wrote a screenplay called The Devil's Grave. It started off as a script about 12 years ago that was universally hated by everyone I showed it to. I mean, hated. And in retrospect, I can see why. I wasn't quite there yet as a writer. And then I made a short film based on it. This was in 2011. It turned out okay, but it's my first short film. It's you can only expect so much. And then I rewrote it as a creepypasta last year, and it was read on Lady McCreepsta's YouTube channel and podcast. You just have to go to her channel and check it out. And then I decided to switch that back into a script, actual screenplay format. And to my horror, it was only 39 pages now, and I needed it to be at least 90. So I rewrote and ended up with a feature script some months later, and it's been circulating in competitions and receiving some awards, and I'm very proud of that. It's like, as an artist, I think we need to set standards for ourselves where we see something like, in my case, The Sixth Sense. I go, wow, okay, that's the standard. That's what I should be shooting for with my stories or better.
Mm-hmm.
And amongst our own canon of work, we arrive at something, we go, wow, I'm capable of that. And then everything afterwards, you're going to try to do that or better. And through that, we grow. And if you don't look back and see our first films as something terrible, then I think we haven't grown.
Right.
So that's a good way to look at it. If you could choose only one, would you prefer to be in front of the camera or behind it?
I'll say behind because I think writing is still my biggest passion. So, I think if I had to choose performing or writing, I would choose writing because it's creating that world in its entirety and you really have a full control of your voice and what you want to do.
I've always felt that being an actor would be almost entrapping in that you are subject to performing what you are handed. You can make it your own and even improvise, but you still have to, you can't just rewrite the end unless you're, Tom Cruise or somebody and you have that kind of clout. But even as a filmmaker, I would only even direct films that I myself have written. I wouldn't even want to just direct something that, I mean, you have a lot of control as a director, but it feels like storytelling is the root of our passions, really, and telling our stories is the most important thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another generic question.
All right.
Do you believe in ghosts?
I do.
Do you have...
I mean, not much more to say, but
do you have a ghost story or anything like that of your own?
Not really. Nothing too, concrete. One time I was filming in Linda Vista Hospital, which is, notoriously haunted. And it was more just like a feeling. It could have been myself knowing that it was notoriously haunted. But I went and kind of explored just because I have that morbid fascination. And I think it's almost similar to I'll feel sort of fascinated by walking through a graveyard. It's also the history of it, who might have lived here or been here. And it was, if I'm remembering correct, it used to be a psych ward, and there was some rooms that were still had children's things, but looking very creepy at this point. So yeah, it was kind of that combination of tragic and dark, but there was this, innocence or life here once. So it was just interesting on that level. But then I don't know, it just got to a point where I'm like, I feel like if I stay here any longer, any spirits that might be here will feel like I am mocking or belittling what pain they might have gone through here. So I don't know. I just had a feeling. I'm like, get out now. Didn't see a spirit or anything like that. But I guess I've, also like I was a scare actor on the Queen Mary when they have their Halloween event there. That was actually my first job in LA.
Hmm.
That's really interesting and has that same sort of haunted atmosphere too, because they usually will have one or two haunted houses that they build in this ship, which is super notoriously haunted. And yeah, it's just this creepy and eeriness, I guess, just this like feeling more so. But no, haven't had any ghost sightings that I can report on. There's no reason for me not to believe in them. I would say like I could see someone dying, especially in an untimely or unjust way or unfinished business or whatever it is, and a part of their spirit lingering. That seems very like a realistic possibility.
It seems like even the most primitive of man have had some level of understanding that a spiritual plane exists, spirits in the rocks, in the trees, and whatever, the sun, and so forth. That's kind of amazing. Like, how did you come up? You can't even like start a fire or roll a wheel or something, yet
Mm-hmm.
you understand this concept of a spirit.
Right.
I was watching something on YouTube. I don't remember who it was recently, where he's a religious man, but he was asked if he believes in ghosts. He goes, "No, I don't believe in ghosts." How do you, if there's a spiritual essence, if you believe man is a soul,
Yeah.
how could there not be that? What else is a ghost but that?
Right. Your thoughts on the current state of horror?
We've crossed a line where in the original Hellraiser, I'm thinking, oh, that was animated by hand to create the lightning effect. And there's a certain charm to practical effects that I love. But I realized while watching Hellraiser, the new one, recently, that nothing in it looked like CG. It all was just, I can let go.
Right.
And it's all so realistic now, even on a streaming based film. A part of the art has been lost, but it's just been elevated to a new level. Things are much more realistic. And it wasn't even just the effects, even what we see on TV was far superior in terms of production
Mm-hmm.
value than what was in theaters just 20, 25 years ago. The overall quality of the production has gotten better. As far as stories, I think we're seeing more episodic stuff like on Netflix. I really like the Haunting of Hill House. Even the actors that appear now are more mainstream actors, whereas before you had television actors and you had film actors. And if you crossed that line, you either graduated to a greater state of celebrity and status as an actor, or you declined into,
Mm-hmm.
depending on which direction you're going. Considering that the original Hellraiser got a rated X rating back in '87, comparing that to what I just watched in the new one, which is much more graphic,
Yeah.
I can see us as being more liberated in pursuing stories in the direction that horror deserves. But I remain skeptical that good writing can support good ideas, because horror is challenging to write well, and so much of it has been done before. So I think we're heading in a good direction.
Awesome. Yeah, agreed.
So you love to read. I do not. I don't hate it, but it's just more of a chore for me. It takes effort for me to read a page as opposed to just having it wash over me. And
Some people would say you haven't found the right book then.
there we go. Now that leads us to my question.
Uh-huh.
What solid, can't miss, but not too long of a novel could you recommend for me?
Um,
I'll tell a story in the meantime. I was at a Barnes and Noble 12, 15 years ago. And I asked the young lady there, this is me being very determined to finally read a fucking book. I've read lots of nonfiction, but more like how to learn how to do whatever. This was me wanting to read a horror book. So I asked her, where's your horror section? I've been through the whole thing. And she goes, horror section? Yeah, like Stephen King and Edgar Allan Poe and all that. She looked at me like it was fucking crazy or something. I'm like, don't you have like a section for Lovecraft or Anne Rice? She goes, well, we have a suspense. I'm like, no, I mean, just scary. I'm used to going into Best Buy and there's going to be departments for horror and drama and romance and comedy. Where's your fucking horror section? She had no idea is that a thing in bookstores that there's no such thing as a horror section? I don't understand this.
No, I mean, usually there's at least like horror / supernatural or horror. I mean, I feel like usually there's like 4 or 5 different categories. Like here's the true crime section. Here's here's usually horror, supernatural is pretty prominent. Yeah, mystery sometimes will have its own, but sometimes mystery can be stuff that bridges that horror category too. But no, I don't think that should be an unheard of. What a horror section. Crazy.
I didn't know if it was something looked down upon in the literary community, and so we don't do
maybe
horror.
Maybe if I don't know, they were I don't know, a certain breed where they're like we're too evolved for horror or something like that.
But it was a Barnes and Noble. I mean, for crying out loud.
Yeah. Well, okay, it's not short, but because I know you like The Shining a lot. Dr. Sleep is my favorite Stephen King book, and I think there was a lot of really interesting things that it was kind of the look of like what those type of hauntings would do to someone this many years later. And there was a different type of creature introduced that were very malicious and powerful and very interesting.
I have the movie.
The book's a lot better.
Oh, is it a lot different though?
Yeah, I've watched the movie twice, and now the second time I'm like, okay, maybe I was a little too harsh. Like, there's things. It's one of those cases where I'm like, I like some version of this being illustrated, but there's again, it's not bad. You'll probably like it more without reading the book because, but the book just goes into a lot more depth, and I think, especially with Dan Torrance, goes into a lot more of what that trauma and all those years did to him in the state that he was in, and then it kind of comes full circle with a new generation sort of a thing. But really, really phenomenal. I highly recommend audiobooks if you can't get yourself to sit down for long periods of time and read.
I don't feel like that's reading a book.
It is. Don't shame audiobooks.
I don't want to shame it. It's more like there's a challenge for me personally to get through reading a book, and that's an action that I've never done before that I specifically want to address. Even beyond whatever the fuck the book is, just reading it, that's fiction. And so that's part of the challenge of why I'm asking. And I understand his son has written some excellent material.
Yeah, I was going to say that was my other one. It's not really in that same subgenre. But, maybe in the next few months around Christmas, Nosferatu is, I think, one of the best modern horror books I've read. And it is a bit shorter.
Okay. Well, there are go-to in, let's say, the fantasy world stories like The Hobbit or something. It's made for children, something that's very basic and simple. There's nothing like that necessarily in horror, I take it, outside of Edgar Allan Poe or some
That's
other.
more made for children?
It doesn't have to be, but if it could be dumbed down for me, that would be a bonus.
I think that would be more short story / novella.
That's what really surprises me, and what makes me feel intimidated about reading is when it's at hundreds of pages of reading. You probably just think, oh, that's going to be just that much more delicious content, and I'm thinking, fuck. As a screenwriter, I've never even read a script outside
Mhm.
of people that I know that
Yeah.
need notes. I don't know what it is. And I'm not illiterate and I don't have dyslexia or anything, but I just find it so daunting to just drudge through page after page after page. I must liken it with homework or something.
Oh, no. There is something about sitting down with a physical book that feels a little more personal, and it comes alive in your mind, a little differently, so I tackle that challenge. I mean, the great thing about audiobooks, though, is you can be doing it shouldn't feel like a chore because you can be doing other stuff, like, I'll just put it on walking or cooking or whatever, and then it's kind of like escaping to those worlds during mundane, everyday life stuff, which kinda makes it that much more fun, and some of them really have it's like just the visuals the only thing missing, but, like, some of them even have very immersive sounds and, the narration is just incredible and, usually very much in character. So, yeah, I don't know, that's maybe one way to make it feel less like a chore because you can
Well,
be doing it while you go about your day to day.
I do listen to creepypastas, and I have listened to a lot of old time radio shows, especially the more horror based ones. And then what you're saying does definitely resonate with me in terms of
Mhm.
that vibe you get from it. It's got this whole layer of drama to it.
Well, what do you hope for in the future of horror?
I'd like to see more acceptance of the genre. It's been looked down upon for so long. And perhaps that's justified. I think there's been too many instances of filmmakers just taking advantage of the fact that people will go see anything and
Mhm.
anything gimmicky will. There's a desperate audience who love horror, who want to see good horror, but the content has been lacking. And I think I like how things are trending in the way that budgets are bigger and the performances are more fleshed out, like I was saying before. But I'd like to see the Academy Awards having more stuff allocated to horror films and not just based on something that's more art house or mainstream is okay. I don't know if they're more focused on mainstream. They tend to go for identity politics, or maybe there's some other agendas going on, or
Mhm.
it's a popularity contest, or what is the safest thing. If Meryl Streep came out with something, then we're just going to give the award to her. It's just the
Yeah.
default. I'd like to see it gain greater acceptance, and I'd love to be the one bringing it to people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, definitely horror needs a bigger acceptance, and I feel like it's starting. Like, again, I think with a lot of these, like, TV shows that are just very gripping, fleshed out, powerful stories, I think helps a little bit. But you do see it coming more into the mainstream, but definitely on the award circle, horror has definitely always been a very underlooked upon genre. But yeah, hopefully it continues to grow. I feel like for a while, there's definitely the classics that were, great content. But for a while, the best core of what horror really is, I feel like has been more an independent and foreign. And I think we're slowly starting to see it coming more into the mainstream. And even indie, I think, is getting a little bit more visibility too, because there have been more instances of, an indie film gets picked up that has a lot of, depth or history or focuses on examining fear and, more than just, yeah, killing people and, that's, the body count and just kind of like simple, probably what most people view horror as. I think we're slowly getting to see some successes even in box office of, some smaller films that really had some more depth and story to tell there that have had some success, and that just immensely helps the horror genre because then it tells, people, oh, okay, people like horror, with some story and core meaning and depth to it,
Yeah,
so
just taking it more seriously in general.
yeah, absolutely. All right. The age old question all horror artists and aficionados get asked: why horror? What is it about the genre that fuels your passion, artistry, and personal connection? Essentially, what does it mean to you? What keeps reigniting that passion?
Hmm. I think my English teacher asked me that.
Mm.
And my response was horror has an ability to extend beyond the ordinary of day-to-day life, unlike just a drama. Not that you can't take a drama and do spectacular, interesting things, but if you can go beyond reality, you're actually expanding into the realm of fantasy in a way. Horror films are kind of like fantasy films, but
Yeah.
just darker. And so creatively, you can do so much more with horror. You can go places that nobody understands and pose questions and present realities that parallel our lives that may or may not actually exist. So it expands my imagination much greater, and I find it mysterious and intriguing. Like, what is going on in that realm, or why did that person commit that act? What was going on in their head? Why is this ghost here? Or the general state of human behavior and how things can go south. And that is, I would say, the heart of it, but I can't deny that there's something about the darkness of it all, which I can't explain. It was
Mhm.
perhaps part of why I was asking you in my first question, like, why the
Yeah.
fuck are we into this? Is it because we're fucked up on some level? But I really don't think we are fucked up. I
Mhm.
think some people are and some people aren't, but I consider myself a constructive enough person, and I try to um, uplift those around me wherever I can. But I also love watching people die slowly and horribly on film, and just hearing about the macabre in real life and in stories. There's also a challenge. I find that it's not easy to come up with any kind of story, but
Mhm.
with horror, so much horror has been conjured up in so many formats that coming up with something fresh is not easy.
Yeah.
But when you do come up with a fresh idea, it's such a breath of fresh air, and you know people want that so badly. And so much of what's produced is the same handful of tropes that you see over and over and over again. I like to challenge myself. I have no other genre beyond horror that will explore that better than what I'm doing right now.
Wonderful. Love it.
Last question. If you were to brutally murder someone, how would you do it? And how would you dispose of the body?
Let me see. How man, see, you would think if I was more demented, like people think of people who like horror, I would probably have an answer ready to go for that. I'll just be thinking about it in my everyday life. Um, Not really sure.
I heard a clever one recently on social media. Somebody had posted, I don't know who it was, but they said they would tip the police as to where the bodies are, and then let the police dig up the area and thoroughly scour it for any clues and abandon it. And then they would go back and they would bury the body there, knowing that they've already searched the area and never to come
That is
back.
pretty smart. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I feel like I wouldn't do a gun. I'm not a gun person,
Mm.
really. And then you have to think about, okay, what could be a lot of work potentially what you're doing, you know? You're like, what do I really want to get into here? I mean, something, I guess it depends too on the person and circumstance.
Right. Why you're killing
Like,
them.
do I really need to see them suffer and make this slow and painful? Or do I just want to get this done and be done with it?
Huh. I leave that to you.
Ideally, I just get triggered into vampirism and then I just basically drain their blood.
Okay. That's actually my second part was also, would you eat them? And if so, what part or parts would you nibble on first? But you'd go for the blood.
Yeah.
You wouldn't necessarily drink it, but I mean,
Maybe.
you would? Just out of curiosity.
Just add a little bit to some wine, you know? Goes down smoothly.
There you go. Make a pie out of it. Blood pie.
I watch too much vampire stuff.
Yeah. I've heard that national parks are a great place because you can just elbow them off the cliff and just, oh, it was an accident. And
Yeah, there you go.
there's not like the police are just right there and you're in the middle of nowhere. So anyway, not to give anybody ideas. Hope nobody dies because of what we're saying right now, but
Yeah, I will say, like on shows like Hannibal or even iZombie, which I loved, they have a lot of like eloquent like cooking montages of how they prepare. I mean, something like that. I'm like, yeah, okay, like especially on iZombie. She's a zombie, so she's having brains, but it's in like, like a spicy ginger ramen, or she puts it in like sushi rolls or whatever it is. And I always think that looks delicious. So, I'd probably take one of their recipes and do a combo cannibal human dish.
in a future segment we call Feature Creatures, we'll review films of old, films of new, favorites of ours, and even provide occasional film commentaries. It'll be like you're right there watching along with us.
And please comment below what you would like to hear most in future episodes.
If you found these horrific ticklings a blend of both pleasure and pain,
In a good way.
please subscribe to our Society of Grotesquerie and Loathing and give whatever form of like or approval the platform you were on provides.
And we hope you'll find it within your cold, black, withered hearts to support us on Patreon.
A link to our PayPal is also below for one-time donations.
It was nice knowing you.